Hello everyone, welcome back. This is S.C. Coleman, author, and today we're going to be continuing to talk about the lodestone. Well, at least what I believe to be reference to a lodestone. In this documentation, there's no direct mention of such an object or substance. But if you take the different elements and put them together, it appears what they are talking about is a lodestone, or in fact a technology made with or from such materials. Now the first thing we'll look at here is this book. Right here, it's the God Kings and the Titans, the New World Ascendancy in Ancient Times, James Bailey. Now the only part that's particularly important here is on page 252. It says Plato story. That's the Greek Plato, of which many are familiar, wrote the Republic, all that. Plato's story affirmed that Atlantis sank, leaving behind it mud shoals. Marine archaeology near the islands of Andros, Bimini, and Puerto Rico, I assume that's what we now call today Puerto Rico, support this statement. Far on the seabed, divers had discovered a pyramid, a great stone causeway, circle of pillars, walls, and buildings, those in shallow water near Andros, 5 miles deep near Puerto Rico. All right, now, before we continue with that particular passage in the book, it's important to note the mention of Andros being an island in the Bahamas near Puerto Rico. Now, of course, the other thing about the lodestone is that you have the Bermuda Triangle, which is known to disappear ships. And in the previous literature that we read about the lodestone, of which there's very little available, the writer mentioned the fact that large deposits of lodestone on the seafloor can bring ships down. Thus you have the Bermuda Triangle. At least that would be a logical conclusion. So here we have International Field Studies, offices at Capital University, 2199 East Main Street, Columbus, Ohio, 43209. Carol V. Bergman, equipment coordinator. And of course, they're using the designator IFS. Sounds like some sort of governmental organization, does it not? IFS. You have IFS agents, right? Stuff like that. IFS can transport by our own bus, fleet, or our aircraft to and from any study site. Our largest single project involves a field station and associated campsite on Andros Island, Bahamas. We are currently developing a new study site in Jamaica and propose other U.S. and Caribbean sites. Now, I would say that the chances are very high, very likely, that this all has to do with the submerged ruins of a city off Andros Island. Here we have another document. This document describes the International Field Studies program on Andros Island, Bahamas. Andros Development Statement. This is from 1973. We have a couple sections that are important. This talks about how they're going to do it through federal projects and scientific and educational foundations, the usual money laundering mechanism. Facilities, blanket sound site. Now here's an interesting part. It says, the construction of the dock will make easier for use and maintenance of the boats. This dock is to be built out of wood and concrete at the end of the rocky point extending into Blanket Sound immediately south of the old school house. Now the reason why that, I believe, is important to note is because anything of a iron or steel material, if we are dealing with lodestone, will in fact be destroyed. So they would have to build out an iron or concrete, and I highly doubt that this dock they're building has to do with boats. It might be, but unlikely. Either way, it is very apparent that something is going on here, something very important, something very impactful, which these university structures want to keep quiet, and they want to get this done in a manner with the least amount of attention put on it. And of course, university structures, as we covered before, control everything from the governments, fake governments anyway, the corporations, basically the entire regulatory structure, everything. They control everything. They do whatever they want. They are, in and of themselves, a republic for the universities, for themselves, against everyone else. But there's a lot of other implications involved here that we need to look at, especially in reference to this book. Besides these definitive projects, International Field Studies will negotiate for the donation by the Owen, Illinois Corporation of several porta-camp structures and other equipment to supplement our present facilities. International Field Studies will furthermore explore the possibilities of establishing and developing additional campsites near the Andros Reef Inn at Stafford Creek and near the Andros Beach Hotel at Nicholstown. International Field Studies will check into the pros and cons of purchasing a propane-operated freezer to assist in the preservation of food, particularly fish and bread. International Field Studies desires to recharter in the Bahamas as a Bahamian corporation with the understanding that upon the dissolution of International Field Studies, all equipment and holdings of International Field Studies in the Bahamas would revert to the possession of the people of the Bahamas, excepting that which would be required for the payment of all outstanding debts accrued against International Field Studies before dissolution. So obviously they're running some sort of clandestine excavation of this submerged structure. And this, of course, is all over the Caribbean, and possibly a possible conclusion is that the Bahamas and the islands out in the Bahamas were originally unified into one landmass, or possibly even unified with the landmass of either between Mexico or Florida. So this submerged city could have a lot of implications to it, and that's what they're focusing on here. So they don't really give a crap about this International Field Studies cover identity or any of the equipment that they're taking out there. What they want to do is they want to get everything out and then shut it all down and erase it, and they do all their money laundering tactics of changing names, of moving corporations, all that stuff, to essentially disperse all evidence that they were even there. Because what they really want is they want to get something. I don't believe that they're going to try and actually excavate this entire city that's been submerged. That would be a huge undertaking and would attract a lot of attention. I believe that they're after one specific element. So this takes us back to the book here, The God, Kings, and the Titans. Here then to refurbish our minds is Jowett's version of the relevant portion of the original text, which describes the extent of the colonies in America, their political power, rising out of their trade to the western Mediterranean upon the one hand, and to the Pacific Islands and Southeast Asia upon the other. One of the priests, who was of a very great age, said, "O Solon, Solon, you Hellenes are never anything but children, and there is not an old man among you." Solon in return asked him what he meant. "I mean to say," he replied, "there is no old opinion handed among you by ancient tradition, nor any science which is hoary with age. And I will tell you why. There have been and will be again many destructions of mankind arising out of many causes. The greatest have been brought about by the agencies of fire and water, and other lesser ones by innumerable other causes. There is a story which even you have preserved, that once upon a time a Phaethon, the son of Helios, having yoked the steeds in his father's chariot because he was not able to drive them in the path of his father, burnt up all that was upon the earth and was himself destroyed by a thunderbolt. Now this has the form of a myth, but really signifies a declination of the bodies moving in the heavens around the earth, and a great conflagration of things upon the earth, which recurs after long intervals. At such times, those who live upon the mountains and in dry and lofty places are more liable to destruction than those who dwell by rivers or on the seashore. And from this calamity the Nile, who is our never-failing Savior, delivers and preserves us. When, on the other hand, the gods purge the earth with the deluge of water, the survivors in your country are herdsmen and shepherds who dwell in the mountains, but those who, like you, live in cities are carried by the rivers into the sea. And whatever happened either in your country or in ours, or in any other region of which we are informed, if there were any actions noble or great, or in any other way remarkable, they have all been written down by us of old, and are preserved in our temples. Whereas just when you and other nations are beginning to be provided with letters and the other requisites of civilized life, after the usual interval, the stream from heaven, like the pestilence, comes pouring down and leaves only those of you who are destitute of letters and education. And so you have to begin all over again like children, and know nothing of what happened in ancient times, either among us or among ourselves. As for these genealogies of yours, which you just now recounted to us, Solon, they are no better than the tales of children. In the first place, you remember a single deluge only, but there were many previous ones. In the next place, you do not know that there were formerly dwelt in your land the fairest and noblest race of men which ever lived, and that you and your whole city are descended from a small seed or remnant of them which survived. You are welcome to hear about them, Solon, said the priest, both for your sake and the goddess, who is the common patron and parent and educator of both our cities. She founded your city 1,000 years before ours. Plato gives the same date, 9,000 years ago, for the foundation of Athens and for the repulse of the invasion from Atlantis. Receiving from the earth and the Hephaestus the seed of your race, and afterwards she founded ours, of which the constitution is recorded in our sacred register to be 8,000 years old. There was a great and wonderful empire which had ruled over the whole island and several others, and over parts of the continent. And furthermore, the men of Atlantis had subjected the parts of Libya within the columns of Heracles as far as Egypt, and of Europe as far as Tyrrhenia. This vast power, gathered into one, endeavored to subdue at a blow our country and yours and the whole of the region within the straits. And then, Solon, your country shone forth in the excellence of her virtue and courage and military skill, and was the leader of the Hellenes. And when the rest fell off from her, being compelled to stand alone after having undergone the very extremity of danger, she defeated and triumphed over the invaders, and preserved from slavery those who were not yet subjugated, and generously liberated all the rest of us who dwell within the pillars. But afterwards there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared in the depths of the sea. For which reason the sea in those parts is impassable and impenetrable, because there is a shoal of mud in the way, and this was caused by the subsidence of the island. So there's a couple things there. First of all, if there in fact is a submerged ruins of a city relating to the destruction mentioned there, then that's exactly what the International Field Studies paperwork is talking about, what they're doing there, what they're attempting to avoid talking about, what they're doing there. Now, the other thing there in that story is that sounds very similar to the War of the Rings in the Fellowship of the Rings trilogy, or at least in the Silmarillion and the history of it, when you had the unified army of men and elves who defeated Mordor. And in that context, the son of the king in that story, who took the ring to be destroyed but didn't destroy it, but took it with him and then was betrayed by it, and essentially that's what destroyed their kingdom of whatever kingdom that was. I don't remember the name of it. The other one, not Rohan, the kingdom with the white city and all that. Anyway, that destroyed their kingdom because they took this ring and wanted to use it as a weapon. Logically speaking, that might be what happened here. There could be some type of weapon, or perhaps an object which can be used as a weapon, but it was not necessarily intended for that purpose. It's hard to say. So you take a unified army, a huge, vast force, and we've heard this story before, right? The 300 Spartans standing against the so-called Persian army, of which there's many versions where it's not actually a Persian army, it's just a conglomeration of different peoples that are coming in to invade Greece, or, there's all kinds of different versions of that, especially with stupid Hollywood. But we've heard this story a bunch of times. You got a small group of military guys, they're victorious over great power, all that stuff, right? But if you think about it, you've got the same story with in the Lord of the Rings and in the War of the Rings trilogy, the Fellowship of the Ring, all that, with the last alliance of men and elves against Mordor. So they take this weapon with them in this context, and it ends up destroying them, decimating their city, destroying this whole area, all that stuff. And you think about a weapon that's that powerful, and logic would conclude that international field studies is looking for that. I don't know what it is. I don't know what size it is. I don't know anything about it. The logical conclusion is that it's made with lodestone, giving it inherent, natural, what we would call today magnetic properties. We don't really know about it, and the people who did know about it didn't really know about it either. But either way, whatever that material is could be formed by somebody who knows about it into something extremely devastating and powerful. Because not only does it have natural magnetic effects, it can impart those onto others, and if you figure out how to harness that in a way that you can control, you can control so much. In our body, we have iron in the blood, and if you have the ability to manipulate magnetic fields, if you will, we don't actually have, I believe, the proper language to describe these things. But if you can manipulate that, you can in fact draw out the blood from any number of people, essentially instantly killing them. That's also similar to the idea of the gauntlet for in the Marvel comics, the gauntlet where you can snap your fingers and erase half of all living things. Or is it half of people? I think it's half of all living things, something like that. Very weird. But if you take that and you compare it also to the breastplate that the high priests wore and all of this other stuff, right? You look at it, you say, this is likely a technology which has the capability to cause catastrophes, right? Natural catastrophes, all kinds of other things. If you have that capability, you can shift the poles in the planet. You can affect anything, almost anything in reality. Obviously, probably using it would upset the balance of the equilibrium, the interplay, or the structure of the galaxy, even other parts of the universe. Well, there's really no way to know, right? And even if you just tried to test it out, that's not exactly something you want to play around with. And you think about the fact that these university structures create a vindictive and vengeful organization of morons. They, above all else, should not get their hands on something like this. They will definitely try and wield it against the populations of the planet, considering all their Agenda 2030 garbage and all their other nonsense. They're playing with the economy and they're trafficking and harvesting children and all that stuff. They get their hands on something like this, and you're talking about essentially speaking a petulant, angry, hateful child getting their hands on a weapon that can destroy planets. Pretty much. And there's no real way to know what it is, what size it is, or anything about that. The evidence simply points towards that direction. The elements add up. They all come together like pieces in a puzzle. It's almost like if you had a puzzle and you just had the outline of it, but you didn't have the central portion. You didn't have the focus of that puzzle. You don't really know what's in the middle. But everything around it is pointing towards this conclusion, and that's not something that should be ignored by anyone. Thank you.